Let's say a very good morning, though, first of all, to Jamie Jenkins. Hi, Jamie.
Good morning, Mike. On Sunday you'll start seeing cyclists overtaking cars on Sunday.
I mean, is that right, that it is actually every road that's 20 miles an hour?
Well, it's the restricted roads, Mike. So that's kind of the roads you normally find where you've got kind of street lights every couple of 100 metres.
Okay.
So pretty much where the default speed limit there was 30 miles an hour, almost all roads in Wales will drop to 20 miles an hour unless you've got one of the local authorities have put an exemption in and kept some. But just outside, literally about 5 minutes from my house walking, Mike, it's bizarre. You've got a 40 mile an hour limit, then it drops down towards 30, then it goes down to 20, then it goes back up to... You're just constantly changing speed limits.
It's confusing. See, I found that as a general rule in the rest of Britain, really, because whenever you drive on motorways in this country, you're never quite sure what the actual speed is. And when you're coming up to a speed camera, because like most people in a relatively modern car or somebody with sat-nav, you get a warning that there's a speed camera. But it's not always clear what the speed is supposed to be. I'm on the M25 quite a lot, and it's supposed to be 70, but an awful lot of it, suddenly it's down to 50, suddenly it's down to 60, but you're not really sure what the speed camera is going to measure you at. So if you go through a gantry that's got a speed camera on it, and you think that the speed limit is 70, but on one of the signs it says 50, what speed is the speed camera going to clock you at? And at what point are you going to get a ticket?
Oh, totally, Mike. You've got parts of the network now, similar in Wales, similar in the M25, where they call variable speed limits. Yeah. So they do change. So, yeah, you're right. You could be thinking it's 70 miles an hour and the kind of thing saying 50. Some people are not sure if that means that that's advisory rather than what you should be doing. And it's absolute madness.
It's very unclear, isn't it?
Yeah, and you just talk about the 20 mile an hour in Wales, Mike. Mark Drakeford and Lee Waters, he's the Deputy Climate Change Minister who's been pushing this. Now
They've got a Deputy Climate Change Minister.
Yeah, Deputy. I never see the actual Climate Change Minister, Mike. I only ever see the Deputy. But he used to be a director at Sustenance Cymru, which is obviously that cycling charity, completely anti-car.
Right.
He's been pushing this. He said, oh, it might not sound like a good idea, but you're going to get used to it anyway. That's what he's been saying. Now, you put a bit of modelling in, Mike, you might see a reduction in deaths of around 9. Now, okay, 9 every life is obviously important, but you've got to put into the wider context. What does 9 deaths mean?
Right.
Well, we get about 90 deaths overall, road accident deaths. So you do see a bit of a reduction potentially in that. The RAC have done a little bit of a blog looking at some evidence saying there's actually inconclusive whether or not you do see a reduction. But that 9 deaths, put that into context, Mike, there's over 35,000 deaths anyway in Wales in a year. So you're only talking 0.03%. So, you've got to look at the costs and the benefits of a policy. And some of the estimates are, Mike, that it could cost about 150 million a year to the economy just by making everybody go slower.
Well, exactly right, because things take longer to get from point A to point B. Deliveries are slowed down. Somebody actually put a jokey tweet out last night saying, Saturday night, last chance you get to order some hot food, because by the time you get it delivered to you on Sunday, it won't be hot anymore, which is obviously a sort of first world problem, if you like. But presumably they've also spent a load of money putting more cameras up to catch people out who are speeding, because we know, for example, from the political side of things, there's a committee in Parliament in London, in Westminster, who are the Cycling and Walking Committee, who want to impose speeding fines on people who go 1 mile an hour over the speed limit. So technically speaking, they would be offering people the chance to get a ticket for doing 21 in a 20.
Yeah, well, we've had 32 million on the road signs, Mike. Drakeford saying we're going to save 90 million on the NHS. We've got these waiting list figures we might want to touch on in a sec. But that's based on the modelling, whether or not we see that saving. But you might say there, then you've got 150 million hitting the economy. And no doubt we will see speeding fines going up. Not everybody, 20 mile an hour, you can do one of those speed awareness courses. But if you get clocked 20 mile an hour we're going over that a couple of times, you can only do a certain number of speed awareness courses in a period of time. So points will rack up. What that mean? Your insurance premiums will probably go up as well, Mike, just because you're going 23, 24, 25 miles an hour.
Yeah.
This is just absolute nonsense. And it's just completely anti-car. Sadiq Khan the same in London, Mike. Where does it stop? The Labour Party will argue. We had it in our manifesto in the last election. It was buried away on page whatever it was. Nobody was talking about that during the pandemic. And this is just absolute madness. And it's going to come in England, Mike. Starmer wins the next election. The voters there,
This
is coming to the whole of England, I would imagine.
I mean, it's already coming to large and more parts of London. It was only this week that Sadiq Khan's, cycling czar was gloating on and on about how they've made more streets safe for people to walk down and to cycle on, and there'll be fewer deaths. The same arguments they're using in Wales. Many more parts of the city here are going to 20 miles an hour. I mean, the ironic thing is that for an awful lot of parts of the city, you can't even do about 9 or 10 miles an hour because there's so much traffic congestion, despite the congestion charge, despite the low emission zone charge, and despite how much it costs to park in London. So people are in their cars, not because they want to be, but they have to be.
Oh, yeah, I had the unfortunate point of driving through London a few months back when I went to watch Tottenham Hotspur, Mike, and you're right. Luckily, actually, if you can do 20 mile an hour in most parts of London, it's absolute madness, the amount of cars on the road. And what these Labour politicians, it's all anti-car, Mike. It pretty much they won't stop until people stop using the cars. It's completely absolute nonsense.
It is mad. I've got a tweet here from Sergeant Major Williams who says it's absolute madness in Wales. They're spending all this money on a 20 mile per hour speed limit when they can't open a dormant cancer centre in Newport due to a lack of public transport. And the NHS is run by absolute idiots. Sorry, that's from John in Bristol. So once again, they're kind of operating at the wrong levels, aren't they? You know, instead of fixing the things that people want to see fixed. Because if you can't, I mean, outside of the cities of certainly of England, if you haven't got a car, you ain't going anywhere.
No, and let's put it into kind of context, bring it into what one of the listeners and the viewers has just messaged there, Mike. So you do see potentially see a reduction. There's a bit more safety with this thing. But let's look at it more broadly as well in terms of where the money can be spent. We've got huge problems in the NHS with waiting lists. The record numbers in England. They're much worse in Wales when you're looking at longer term waits. We've discussed before. You've got nearly 28,000 people in Wales have been on a waiting list for 2 years. It's closer to 277 in England, 100 times worse in Wales with 18 times more people living in England.
Yeah.
So the government's priorities aren't right. People will be dying because of the NHS failures. And so saving some deaths potentially because you've reduced the speed limit, I think a better focus would be on these ambulance delays we're going to get in the winter, where you'd be covering stories, Mike, in England, in Wales, of people who have died because ambulances have not turned up on time. That's where the people want the priority to be.
Of course. And presumably ambulances won't have to go at 20 miles an hour. Will they be subjected to this kind of thing as well? Will they get an exemption?
No, so they can go over the speed limit, but ambulances themselves do impose a certain level over a speed limit. So they won't obviously go 100 mile an hour in a 20 mile an hour zone. So if you reduce the speed limit, that will naturally reduce the speed that ambulances would go as well. And it's not just ambulances, it's other emergency services slowing the traffic down, would slow the roads down. People will say this, you get the lefties in Wales saying, oh, this is a great idea, this is brilliant. But most of those are probably people who don't even got cars, Mike.
Yeah, but also they've bought into this nonsense idea that somehow, cars are responsible for all the evils in the world, and that basically without any cars, the world would be a better place. Well, I've got some bad news for them. The world would not be a better place without cars. It's a much better place with cars in it.
Yeah, well, in Wales, Mike, now, at the top of the valley, not far from where I am, they've closed the railway line for 9 months to electrify it, so people actually can't get up the village.
9 months?
9 months, yeah, and they can't get up the village because then there's no trains all the way down the top of the valley. And you're right with the cars. People can't go cycling to the local supermarket and fetch all their shopping home. It is just absolute nonsense in terms of what they do in there, Mike. I think, the thing is, the thing probably you want to discuss on this one, Mike, is cars have never been safer. And the war on the motorists in London as well with emissions, well, more and more cars are moving to emission-free with electricity. Well, it's the wrong time to be doing these policies.
Yeah, I mean, I keep making this point, right, which is that if the cars are the responsible things for pollution, then why is it that London's air has got cleaner while it's got more congested? Because in the last 2 or 3 years, there's no question in my mind, and I've been driving around in London for a long time, that the roads are much more congested than they ever were, and yet Sadiq Khan's people say, oh yeah, but we've managed to make the air so clean in central London because of ULEZ that we don't have to worry so much about it. And you go, okay, well that means either the cars are not polluting it or something else is happening. And you might have seen the report up in Glasgow where they actually compared the polluted air from since the ULEZ was put in June. So they measured the air June, July into August, and then they measured it back to last year when there was no ULEZ zone. And the polluted air is actually worse this year than it was last year.
Yeah, inconvenient facts, Mike. When
they don't like those.
No, when the facts don't support what the ideology was before you brought it in, they don't roll back. You know, that's the thing. These policies get brought in, and I think one of the things you've been highlighting well on Talk TV and yourself, Mike, as well, is, you know, all this talk about the pollution overground. What about underground? You know,
Yeah,
they're forcing people down onto the underground, where it's much, much worse down there. And I think ultimately, until the public gets a change of policy in terms of new politicians, this is going to be a slowly edged more and more towards fewer and fewer cars. Some of these politicians, Mike, won't be happy until they pretty much got you staying into, you know, your own local village and you can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I know. But that will be also bad for the economy, bad for people's health, and more waiting lists, I'm afraid, for the NHS. Just briefly, because we're nearly out of time, more than 7,289 people waiting more than 18 months to start routine hospital treatment. Figures also showed a total of 389,952 people in England, people waiting more than a year. That's a lot of people, isn't it?
Oh, Mike, it is a lot of people. And as I say, it's one of the things you can guarantee is, you know, Sunak's not going to sort the waiting lists overnight. He's not going to sort stopping the boats. It's bad in England, Mike. It's much, much worse in Wales. Yeah. And I think Sunak said yesterday he's putting £200 million into the NHS this winter. Let's leave on what that means. There's 153 billion spent on the NHS, Mike. 0.13% would be rounding error on a spreadsheet. Yeah. So, you know, they're not really doing anything to tackle these issues, Mike. Britain is broken, and the solution of Starmer isn't going to fix it either.
No, I think that is a problem. And unfortunately, a really good place to stop that conversation. Jamie, thank you very much indeed. Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician there on the news. The NHS England's waiting lists have hit yet another record high, which is incredible, unbelievable. We spoke to a guy in Caerphilly in South Wales yesterday. He said he'd been waiting 14 years for a knee operation. 14 years. Unbelievable.